Welcome, dear viewers. Throughout history, especially in ancient and medieval times, societies in various European kingdoms were divided into three classes. The first class was the ruling family, including the king or emperor, his family, and relatives. The second class consisted of clergy, nobles, and officials. The third class was the common people, comprising everyone who didn't belong to the first two classes. This division is similar to what we discussed in our episodes about the French Revolution. Typically, the ruling family class was the wealthiest, controlling most of the state's money and resources. The second class, including nobles and clergy, was also wealthy, but not to the same degree as the king and his family. The third class, the common people, was mostly made up of farmers who worked the land and traded their crops. The system worked so that farmers paid a portion of their crops to the king as taxes, keeping the rest for themselves for food or trade. However, in some societies, all agricultural land was owned solely by the king, who controlled everything, including the type of crops grown and the amount of taxes imposed. Since the king couldn't collect taxes from the farmers himself, he appointed a group of people to be responsible for the state's lands. Each of them was responsible for a specific part of the land, and was required to bring all the taxes imposed on the lands under their responsibility to the king at the end of each agricultural season. This is where the feudal lords emerged, who collected taxes from farmers and delivered them to the king, just as happened in Egypt during the rule of Muhammad Ali Pasha. These feudal lords were often unscrupulous. They imposed higher taxes on farmers to collect more money, then gave the king the agreed-upon taxes and kept the rest for themselves. For example, if the king imposed a 90% tax on the crop, the feudal lords might take 95% from the farmers, give the king the agreed 90%, and keep the extra 5% for themselves. This situation drove the farmers crazy. Sometimes a farmer would find that he had paid his entire season's crop as taxes. This meant he had spent a whole season cultivating the land, and in the end, the king and feudal lords took all the produce, leaving him and his family without any food for the rest of the season. One might wonder, why don't the farmers leave this losing job? Why do they tire themselves and plant, only for others to come and take everything? But the problem is that if a farmer leaves the land he works on, he won't find another job. He basically doesn't know how to do anything other than farming. Therefore, farmers were forced to endure the injustice of the feudal lords and the king. The king himself was complicit in this crime. He often imposed very high taxes, and then the feudal lords would add to them. Worse still, the king knew that the feudal lords were increasing the taxes he imposed, but he remained silent about it. Why? Because if he stood against the feudal lords and prevented their corruption, none of them would agree to work for him. The feudal lord would say to the king, "Do you think I'm like the farmers who can't find work and will be forced to work for you? No, if I don't like the job, I won't do it. I'm one of the wealthy and notables, so what forces me to tire myself with the farmers, whip them, and chase them in the fields, only to end up with nothing from the taxes collected?" Therefore, the king would let the feudal lords do what they wanted to ensure their loyalty, as long as they brought him the agreed-upon taxes. However, there were some feudal lords who acted in a way that pleased God, taking only the imposed taxes from the farmers without increase. But these were very few. The situation continued like this until an invention appeared that completely changed history in the late 17th century, known as steam power. This invention meant that you could heat a little water over fire and make a machine move from it. Let's talk briefly about this steam power. Do you know the pressure cooker, or what's known as the presto pot? It's the pot that cooks under pressure. If we fill this pot with water and put it on the fire, the water inside will start to boil. But you won't see steam coming out of it immediately. The steam will start coming out of the pot after a period of boiling. Why does this happen? Because the pressure cooker is designed to be tightly sealed from all sides, and no steam escapes from it at all. As soon as the water starts to boil inside the pot, it turns into steam. This steam is supposed to condense and return to its natural state as water. But for steam to condense, it needs its temperature to decrease. But it's trapped inside the pot, which has a very high temperature, so its temperature won't decrease, it won't condense, and it will remain in the steam state. This situation will continue inside the pot. Water boils and turns into steam, and the steam is trapped and accumulates inside the pot. The more the water boils, the more steam accumulates, and the more pressure increases. Because water vapor occupies a larger space than the space occupied by normal water, you can produce a huge amount of steam with a small cup of water. Steam needs more space than water needs. So water settles easily inside the pot, but steam is compressed and confined and wants to get out. The more steam increases, the more it tries to pressure the sides of the pot to find an outlet. And if the amount of steam exceeds its limit, this means that the steam pressure will exceed its limit, and the pot won't withstand all this pressure resulting from the crowding of steam. This is where the steam valve in the pressure cooker comes into play. The steam valve is a small opening, and this opening is blocked by a metal mass that can weigh up to half a kilo or 1 kilo in some types. At the beginning of the boiling stage, the water vapor hasn't yet crowded inside the pot, so its pressure is low. But when the steam starts to crowd, the pressure will start to increase, and will start to press on all sides of the pot to find an outlet to escape from. Therefore the steam will look for the weakest outlet in the pot to start escaping from it. And the weakest outlet in the whole pot is the small opening blocked by the metal mass that weighs a kilo. Instead of splitting the iron-made pot, it will come out of this opening because it's easier. At a certain stage, the steam pressure inside the pot reaches the force that makes it overcome the metal mass weighing a kilo that blocks the opening it wants to escape from. So it lifts the metal mass up and starts to leak. Can you imagine that the steam, from its intense pressure and compression inside the pot, was able to lift a weight of 1 kilogram? This pot that we took is an example, in which the steam was able to move a weight of a kilo due to the intense pressure. With some modifications, we can make it lift or move much heavier weights. And this is the principle of how the steam engine works. The steam engine revolutionized the whole world, and made many manual crafts no longer need to be done by hand. For example, instead of tiring myself cutting wood with a handsaw, I can connect this saw to a steam engine and make it cut wood better and faster than me. This is where creativity began in using energy in steam engines, and how each person would apply this great invention to their craft. Craftsmen became able to do additional work alongside their original work, or even speed up the work they were doing. Manual work that used to take an hour could now be done by a steam engine in 10 minutes, and without fatigue too. Why settle for one steam engine? We can bring several steam engines. And I won't stand on these steam engines myself, I'll bring workers to stand on them. And thus, the work that was done in one day will double. Craftsmen in the workshops began to ask for people to work for them. We need workers to stand on the number of steam engines we brought. And so the dream of the farmers finally began to come true. Finally, they found work other than agriculture and farming. Remember when we said that farmers on the land had no other choice for work? Either you work on the land against your will, or you won't work. Now, after this boom that happened because of steam engines, farmers had an alternative. What forces me to work on land that isn't mine and grow a crop that I might not take anything from, while I can work in any of the new workshops? Certainly, working in the workshop would be more merciful than the slavery they were subjected to in agricultural lands. Indeed, by the 18th century, a large number of farmers left work in agricultural lands and went to work in the new workshops, and those who were capable among them would go to open their own workshop and employ others. It's a great feeling to transform from a slave to the king, to a master over those you employ. In fact, the main purpose for some people to open a workshop was to feel this sense of sovereignty. I am the master over you, workers. And this feeling of sovereignty would grow more and more as the number of workers you employ increases. Therefore, workshop owners were trying to expand their workshops as much as possible. For two reasons. The first is to satisfy the desire for sovereignty that they were deprived of when the feudal lords treated them as slaves. And the second is to expand their industry and trade and thus increase profits. The small workshops that were doing simple work began to grow more and more until they turned into large factories. And each factory consisted of several workshops integrated together, with dozens and hundreds of workers working together in harmony to produce the final product of the factory. And here begins a new phase that will change the course of history, which is the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was a new opportunity for everyone who was living at that time. Some of them knew how to seize this opportunity, so they were able to make very large profits from industry, and were able to expand their business and employ more and more workers. Until a new class appeared in society, a strange class that no one knew where it came from, and how and when. It's a class that's not from the king's entourage, the first class, nor from the nobles and clergy, the second class, but they are also rich and have money. It's the class of factory owners, or in today's language, the capitalists, And this is the beginning of what is known as capitalism, and its followers known as capitalists. Let's call them the whales for the rest of the episode. These wealthy factory owners, or capitalists, or as we agreed to call them the whales, were doing anything to speed up the pace of work. Because the faster the work, the more money increases more and more. The whales were competing among themselves on who expands their business more and more, and who brings the largest number of workers to work for them to manage these large businesses, and thus increase profits. So the whales started competing on the advantages they would offer to workers, so that they would accept to work for them and not work for others. For example, wages. How much will you pay me to work for you? No, the other factory pays more money, I'll go work there. Some would offer workers breaks during work, and provide them with food, and others would provide housing for workers next to the factory. Because the majority of factory workers in that period, as we mentioned before, were coming from villages far from the factory. So the factory owner would say, "You will go before work to catch up with a rival, and you will come to me late because you live far away." No, this talk doesn't work. The second is money for me. I will build you a room with a bed next to the factory for you to sleep in, and from early morning you will be with me in the factory. And don't come on the last day to tell me I will leave early to catch up with returning to our home at the end of the world before night falls. No, my dear, now your home is next to the factory, so you can be late at work as I want. I'm the one who built this house for you at my expense. And this was the first appearance of what is known as the city, which contains many adjacent factories, and around them are the houses of the people who work in them. Some would buy the housing that factory owners were building to become their own property, instead of the factory owner controlling them. Over time, and with the increasing number of workers who want to work in factories, wages began to decline. According to the law of supply and demand, the more something is offered in the market, the more its price decreases significantly. So factory owners started saying, "I will give you meager wages, and I won't build you housing to sleep in, or bring you food to eat. And whoever doesn't like my conditions, let him show me his back. You're not inventing the wheel. You're just standing on machines, which is a job that doesn't need a bachelor's or doctorate degree. Any person on the street can do this job." This excess abundance in the numbers of workers willing to work in factories made workers' wages decrease significantly. The factories were satisfied. "We don't want more workers," and thus their wages decreased significantly. "You will work in the factory for 16 hours a day, and you will take pennies. Do you like that, or should I fire you and bring someone else? There are thousands of workers standing outside just waiting for me to give them permission to work." And so the workers were forced to accept wages that barely feed them, which is better than dying of hunger. In fact, workers sometimes accepted wages that weren't even enough for their food. Do you know what this means? We have returned to the age of feudalism again. Just as the farmer used to work on the land and find nothing to eat, now workers work in factories and also find nothing to eat. From here arose a grudge from the workers towards the whales, and their greedy and exploitative capitalist orientations, based on exploiting people's need just to find food. While the capitalist whales were getting fatter, the workers were on the verge of starvation. It reached the point where for a family to find something to eat, both the father and mother had to work, and sometimes even children had to work. Meaning if the father in the family went to work, he would take a salary that's only enough for him. So every member of the family had to work to find something to eat, whether father, mother, or child. And of course, this was a happy opportunity for factory owners. Certainly the wages of women and children would be less than the wages of men, because naturally they would do less work than what the man was doing. This is God's creation. God created men like this, and created women like this, and created children like this. God created the adult man stronger than the woman and stronger than the child. Testosterone responsible for muscle building is only in men. This is a nature that no one can deny. In fact, this is a capitalist plan aimed at convincing women that they can replace men. Why? To replace men who take higher salaries for their work with women who will take lower salaries. Here you might start to wonder, won't women do the same jobs as men? Then surely they will demand the same salaries as men. This is if they can do the same jobs as men. If they can work in coal mines or lift stones or operate heavy machinery. The whales know and are sure that women will never be able to do the same as men, because they are not designed for these violent jobs. But in an attempt to prove that they can replace men, they will accept any job and any salary. I am better than the man at work, and I will prove to you that I am better than him by doing the same job as him, and for a lower salary too. Do you see the capitalists' plan? Anything that brings less cost and more profit. In addition, the idea that female workers are like male workers will create a disaster in wages. As we said a little while ago, the great readiness of workers made the demand for them in the labor market little, and thus their salaries became very little. Imagine that their salaries are low, and they are only male workers. What about when the number of workers in the labor market increases more when they become male and female workers? Meaning if there were 100,000 male workers, and this is considered a large number and makes the whales control the wages, what about when the 100,000 workers become 150,000 workers when female workers are added? This way the whales will control more because their number has increased. The whales will choose whoever they want. Whoever has a lower salary I will choose to work for me, whether woman or man, I don't care. And the more the numbers of workers increase, the more their salaries decrease, the more the whales rejoice more and more. Supply and demand, sir. Give me in things that don't cost. And this is simply the issue of equality between men and women, from the perspective of capitalists. Capitalists want to create a competitor for the male worker to reduce salaries as much as possible. And congratulations to the whales, their plan has succeeded completely. But to be fair, not all women were supportive of this equality issue. Some of them were not interested in the fatigue of work. What is this work and what does it have to do with me? I'm sitting in my house honored and respected, and my husband toils and brings me money. What forces me to go work in a coal mine, or operate an oil machine and all this dirt? I'm in my house. But this wish of theirs did not come true because of the outbreak of World War I. In World War I, all the men of Europe went to war, and this is literally not an exaggeration. And not just any men who went to war, but the men who were of working age, or more precisely those capable of working. Everyone on the front, and in the trenches. And here the whales almost went crazy. There were no more men to run the factories. Their businesses began to stall, and losses began to increase. You might say here, ah, beautiful. This is an opportunity for the remaining workers to impose their conditions on the whales. The number of workers has decreased, so wages must increase. But in reality, the number of workers decreased to the point that there were no workers left. I'm telling you that all people of working age were recruited. Anyone working in a factory means he is able to go to war. Consequently, it became obligatory for women to go to replace men in factories. Here's the continuation of the English translation. Consequently, it became obligatory for women to go to replace men in factories. Here there was no longer room to talk about women's rights, or equality, or any of this talk. No, you are compelled. Ah, nice. Now women will impose their conditions on the whales at their ease because there's no one else. But unfortunately, there's another problem. Women no longer had any options at all. The man of the house went to war, and there's no one to support them. And this is what the whales knew. They knew that if women didn't work, they wouldn't find anything to eat. So either women accept to work for low wages, or they stay in their homes without work, and find no one to bring them money because the man went to war. Consequently, women and their children would die of hunger. And there's another very important thing. Women sometimes didn't have the luxury of choosing a job, because countries in World War I had to operate weapons factories to be able to manufacture weapons for the war. So they were recruiting women only to operate the factories. Yes, there were male recruits of course who were helping them operate the factories, but with the progress of the war, and the increase in the number of casualties among soldiers, there was a shortage in the number of soldiers in the army. So the men who were in the factories went to the front, and the women who were in the houses went to the factories, whether they were military factories or civilian commercial factories. Women entered a state of suffering in the two world wars, whether the first or the second. Oh God, what is this capitalism that has no mercy at all, trading in humans and buying and selling them? Yes, indeed, this capitalism is a very ugly thing. It depends mainly on collecting the largest possible amount of money in the fastest possible way, and with the least losses, no matter how you collect this money. Will you employ workers in inhumane conditions? Normal, no problem. Will you make them take low wages in exchange for torturing them at work? Okay, no problem. This will increase my profit margin. And if you think this is the dirtiest thing in capitalism, we unfortunately haven't entered into the more serious matters yet. When capitalist whales make any investment, their first and main goal is profit. How much will I gain from this matter? It's impossible for the investment I'm going to make to have a small profit margin, and not worth the effort that will be expended in it. And will this investment make me profit in the first place? These are questions the whales ask themselves before entering into any new investment. The previous questions can be overlooked and not considered unethical questions if the investments will be related to luxuries. They are questions resulting from greed, but it's not a problem. For example, if you're going to do an investment project in mobile phone manufacturing, or car manufacturing, or going to space, these are things that if you do them will benefit us, and if you don't do them won't harm us. But there are other investments where this kind of thinking is not permissible. And these are investments that if you do them will benefit us, and if you don't do them will harm us to the extent that it may lead to death, like investments in medical fields. Haven't you asked yourself why in the midst of this terrible medical and technological progress, we are not able to make a final medicine for some diseases such as Alzheimer's disease or cancer? Why don't these diseases have a cure? Why do we have to follow a treatment plan that continues for months and years, and in the end this treatment plan may not succeed, and the patient dies after paying all these costs on the treatment plan? While we see trivial medical investments like compensation for amputated limbs, meaning any person who has an arm or leg cut off, we will be able to return it to him, either by making alternatives that are implanted in his body, or by changing the genes of the body, and making the cut hand grow again like hair and nails. Of course all this talk is being studied and hasn't been applied on the ground yet, and there are many possibilities in the future that what I'm saying will become a reality. And here we must ask a question. Amid all this medical progress, why can't we cure Alzheimer's or cancer? Don't say we don't know, say they don't want to. They don't want to tire themselves in searching for a cure. Why should I make a medicine for a cancer patient that cures him finally while I can sell chemotherapy for a longer period and at a higher price and thus earn more? The small gains in things like this make investments in them very few. Any whale of the capitalist whales would prefer to invest in chemotherapy because it will continue to treat the patient for a longer period and thus will sell more and earn more, rather than investing in a medicine that he will sell to the patient only once and cure him finally. This is considered a small gain if there is a gain at all, because such a move would completely stop the chemotherapy business, and here you must focus on my words well. I'm not saying they have a cure for cancer or a cure for Alzheimer's and are refusing to show it. But I'm saying they're not trying to develop things like this. They don't tire themselves in doing studies and research to find a final cure for such diseases. Because maybe the only treatment for a disease like cancer is really chemotherapy, but how will we know it's the only way as long as we haven't tried anything else? And as long as those who have money, who are the whales, are not trying, then no one will try. Because the studies that are conducted on things like this are very expensive and cannot be done by any ordinary person. The rich must do it, and if investments in such things won't profit them, they won't do them. Let's leave these matters aside and talk about something else entirely. In late 2019 and early 2020, the corona pandemic hit the whole world. The number of deaths in millions, and the number of infections in tens and hundreds of millions. To the extent that corona became comparable to the Spanish flu and surpassed it, which occurred in 1918. The question here, why did the whales invest in final medicines that also give you future immunity from the disease, and above all this for free? What are these huge losses that I just mentioned? A medicine that cures finally and gives you future immunity and for free? I personally took the vaccination in Egypt for free. Long live Egypt, O Hajj. But since when did capitalist whales have all this amount of kindness towards people? Why didn't they make the corona treatment like cancer treatment? Or let's leave this topic aside. Maybe it's a bit far because they are two different diseases. At least they could have made the corona treatment for a fee, even if it was little. The important thing is that we make a profit even if it's small, or at least not lose a big loss. And the answer to this question is very simple. The losses that the whales will incur from the continuation of the corona disease are much greater than the losses they will incur if they provide a permanent and free medicine for the patient. Sir, this corona pandemic closed the whole world, and stopped international trade and closed factories and companies, and the company that wants to work will be forced to set a special budget to protect its employees from infection with the disease, hand sanitizers, social distancing, masks, open workplaces, daily sterilization courses. All these are expenses that must be paid in the long term, if the disease continues. And forget about all this. The amount of losses incurred by the whales as a result of the stoppage of global trade is estimated in trillions. A trillion is 1,000 billion. and the repercussions of these losses are still ongoing until now. Until now, the big whales are suffering from corona, which is considered to have ended. God, why all this? Take this medicine, it's final, and will give you immunity, and for free. Come on. No, and what else? We will deliver it to you to the door of your country. They are even telling you, please take the medicine. No matter how smart you think you are, the capitalist system and the whales will be smarter than you. It's an economic system without principles. Anything that brings money, whatever it is, we will do it without conscience. Money is everything in this system. Where's the problem? That the capitalist system is the democratic system, meaning it depends completely on personal freedom. I am free to manufacture what I want, and sell at the price I want, and set the laws I want on my products, as long as everything is within the scope of my property. I am the owner of the idea, and I am the owner of the product, and I am the one who adjusts its manufacturing system, so I control it as I want. And likewise, you have absolute freedom to agree to what I offer or reject it. And it is the essence of democracy in the capitalist system. That's why you find me in most episodes that mention the Cold War saying that the Cold War was a conflict between the communist system and the democratic capitalist system. I always like to stick these two words together. But if we come to the truth, this is the only good thing about capitalism, which is democracy. The idea that the capitalist system is a democratic system is what makes it dominate the world until now. Because it opens the doors of competition between companies. The more sacrifices companies make, the more customers they attract. Because, excuse me, as a consumer customer, what makes me go to buy expensive goods while I can buy the cheap one, especially if both are of the same quality? This seller is greedy and wants to sell at a high price, while this one is respectable and sells at a low price. I will go to buy the product with the lower price, and leave this greedy one to starve to death with his product. So the greedy one will have to lower his price so he can compete, or else he will declare bankruptcy. And competition is not only in prices, but in the quality of products and the extent of providing services. And the more competition between companies increases more and more, the better the products become. And who comes out winning in the end of all this? We consumers. Ordinary simple people. And this is the message I want to direct to Apple and Samsung fans who deal with these two companies, as if they were Real Madrid and Barcelona. You find an Apple fanboy cursing Samsung, a Samsung fanboy cursing Apple, and you find these fanboys getting into fights with each other in the comments. What is this, man? Were they from the rest of your family? Let the two companies compete. What's it to you? We are the ones who come out winning in the end. Every time Samsung makes something good, Apple will be forced to make something better than it. And the same system, every time Apple makes something good, you find Samsung making something similar. And in the end you will find a complete iPhone and a complete Samsung. And you are free to choose what you want. And this talk doesn't apply to Apple and Samsung only, but applies to all companies that compete with each other in the world. Every company must excel to gain the satisfaction of consumers. And the company that won't enter this competition, I assure you that it will declare bankruptcy as soon as possible. Like our Aunt Nokia, who kept relying on the name and the name and the name, and on the fans and whatnot. Here are the fans who left her and bought iPhone as soon as it appeared in 2007. Competition between companies is necessary, so that companies know at any time that they can lose their customers. If one day the company I buy from decides to raise prices crazily, I will go to buy from competitors simply. But beware that all this beautiful talk I'm telling you doesn't make you forget that capitalism is a dirty system. A system without religion and without principles, living on sucking people's blood. And all the beautiful talk we mentioned earlier will collapse completely if capitalism turns into a monopoly. But this monopoly, God willing, will have a separate episode. The capitalist system is the system that won in the Cold War. There were conflicts between it and the socialist system, or even the communist system, which is considered an extension of socialism. But does this mean that communism is better than capitalism? Of course not. Communism also has cursed things in it, and to be honest, both systems are like crap. But talking about communism needs a separate episode. So if you want an episode about it, please write to me in the comments. And so, this is all I have in today's episode. I hope you liked it. If you have any question, ask me in the comments. And if you liked the episode, share it with your friends, and thank you.